All right, now we're going to be looking at the regional reference frames. They're densified versions of the ITRF. So you're adding in those extra points. And as I touched on, it's done for computational reasons. The ITRF has to restrict how many stations can be included. And as I said, the purpose of ITRF is to monitor and develop an accurate global model, not to monitor all the geophysical processes. So you may have a very different reason for including your data in APREF as opposed to in the IGS, the International GNSS Service, which gets included in ITRF. Regional reference frames provide that very strong basis for national geodetic datum development. However, as we just said then, and as we were telling our friends in Africa, they're not essential. They're helpful, but you can do it without it. And different regions do this in very different ways. And I've got some examples here of how that is done differently between Europe and Asia Pacific region, for example. I'm going to skip over this one because we've covered a lot of these benefits of the regional collaboration. And I want to bring your attention to this one. So let's start by looking at the European Terrestrial Reference System of 1989. This is where we talk about systems and frames again. Richard, I don't like the use of the word system here. It's really, if they were to go back and change it, it's essentially a frame is what they were defining here. It's very confusing. So the European Terrestrial Reference System as defined here was fixed to the Eurasian plate in 1989. And their regional reference frame that they've developed for Europe is static. The one for Asia Pacific, as I'll show you in a moment, is a time-dependent frame. You get changes of coordinates over time. Since the Eurasian plate is moving at an approximate rate of 2.5 centimeters a year, the difference between ITRF and ETRS 89 increases with time. And they handle this using a time-dependent transformation. So it's really a model that describes how the Eurasian plate is moving as you get further and further away from an epoch of 1989, 2.5 centimeters per year. So the GNSS-derived coordinates are calculated for ITRF for some type of observation epoch. And then these coordinates are then transformed back to ETRS 1989 using a plate motion model. What this does is it minimizes the differences between ITRF today and ETRS 89 at that time. But you can imagine if you've got these discrepancies or you've got particular regions that move differently to other regions, just taking away the average between the two is not going to get rid of all the biases and distortions. So things like plate tectonic motion is taken out, but then when you've got local tectonic effects, so for example, there's parts of Europe that have seismic activity, crustal deformation, you've got plate flexing, you've got glacial isostatic adjustment, which is happening differently in different parts across Europe. When you take out that average plate tectonic motion, you end up with these little residuals. So that's what they mean when they're talking about coordinate velocities are minimized rather than eliminated, because when you move that plate motion back, there's still some residuals remaining. If you compare that with, jump forward to the, so here's a description of that. If you look at on the left-hand side, what that's showing is the Europe model, and it's got the movement of, you can see the arrows roughly all pointing in the same direction. It's about 2.5 centimeters per year is the vector of how much that European plate is moving. On the right-hand side, you can see once you take out that 2.5 centimeters of movement, roughly moving in that northeast direction, you still get these residuals where the residuals are the lines that are pointing every which way direction, because you've taken out the average, but you've got all these residuals that are left over. And the residuals are all heading in different directions, apart from the ones, if you look up sort of in the Fennoscandia region, so you look at sort of Sweden, Norway, all roughly pointing towards the west. And that's primarily due to things like glacial isostatic adjustment. So you've got this major secondary cause once you take out the plate tectonic motion. APREF, it's different. And APREF was deliberately designed to be a time-dependent reference frame because there was very strong recognition that it's not a single tectonic plate that's all moving in the same direction. But instead, what we wanted was a more direct realization of the ITRF at a denser view. We wanted to be able to see the movement, the plate tectonics, all the intraplate motion at a higher degree of accuracy. So APREF was not designed to be a static frame. It's a time-dependent reference frame. We get a new coordinate set coming out every week. And the APREF Central Bureau is providing those weekly coordinates to reflect that plate tectonic motion, seismic shifts, and other geodynamic processes, because that's what countries want. They want to see that change and understand that change. Some national geodetic datums use a time-dependent version like APREF as constraint for their national static datums, like Australia and New Zealand. And Australia, as I mentioned before, maps between them using a plate motion model to go from a time-dependent frame, which is called ATRF. It's almost identical to ITRF, and GDA 2020, which is the static datum. So the user gets to pick what they want. So a regional time-dependent reference frame is supporting the applications of our region, where plate motion and seismic activity are significant. For example, earthquake monitoring, tsunami warning systems, and high-precision navigation. So while both the ETRS 89 and APREF serve as regional geodetic reference frameworks, their operation and their design are different because they reflect the respective tectonic environments. ETRS is static and it's tied to the Eurasian plate, and it suits Europe's relatively stable context. APREF, on the other hand, had to be a dynamic system and deal with the alignment between ITRF reflecting the more ongoing and constant tectonic activity and the complexity of that Asia-Pacific region. So you can see for two different regional reference frames, they were set up, they were designed, and they operate very differently. There's a range of other regional networks as well. As I mentioned before, the body that sort of looks after this and controls the way that they are designed and operated fits under the International Association of Geodesy. There's a commission there and many sub-commissions, one of which is looking at regional reference frames. So there's one for Europe, South America, North America. There is a group set up for Africa as they look towards the development of that regional frame, as well as Asia Pacific and Antarctica. I'm not going to touch on this one because Basara is going to take us through that in more detail later on. We've talked a bit about the UREF system. The interesting thing is, look at the number of analysis centers they have. For the 450 sites, the UREF, the development of their regional reference frame, have 16 different analysis centers. What I'm trying to do is get at least one of those 16 analysis centers to help Africa, for example. Can they analyze data for Africa rather than having 16 do it for Europe? That would be nice. So we're lucky in Australia. We have, what have we got? 3 or 4, I think. So we've got Geoscience Australia, there's one in Victoria, Curtin Uni, and I think we've got one in China as well. So that's great. And they're looking to have more from the Australian region, which would be fantastic, from the Asia Pacific region, sorry. And then SERGAS, which is really started off as South America. They're now trying to bring that together with North America as well, which is great. So to be a regional reference frame for the Americas. And yeah, there's a great team involved in SERGAS, which came out of a lot of the people working and operating on this within South America, and people like Dan Roman working very hard to try and link that between the North and the South, which is fantastic. And they have about 500 stations. They've got 11 different processing centers, which are local, 2 SERGAS combination centers, which is fantastic. And they also do, which is different to the other ones, they do VLBI and SLR as well. So they recognize the value of having these systems integrated. As we talked about, all these different geodetic techniques are complementary. So it's great to see that they're including the SLR, the VLBI, and the GNSS all together as part of this system. As you can see here, the links on the colors represent the IGS stations, and the green ones are like their regional reference stations. So you can see how they have a smaller subset which go into the determination of ITRF, which are red, and then their regional reference frame solutions are shown in green. Similar to what has been done with APREF, they have technical guidelines, recommendations, and they provide advice on how to set up sites and how to join the network and the benefits of joining that network. So this information is available for the APREF, but sometimes it's also good to have a look at how they're doing these things in other communities as well. So I'd advise you to have a look through their guidelines and recommendations. ArabRef is another region that currently is exploring how they're going to do this. They don't have a regional reference frame. And one of the things that they're considering is how are they going to implement this in the Arab states region, and how does that overlap with Africa? There is kind of an overlap, not just within the IAG, but also within the UN, where a lot of the countries, they might sit in Africa, but from a geopolitical standpoint, a lot of their interactions are with countries from the Arab states. So where do they fit? And would they be included in both of those networks? Given that neither exist at the moment, it's not too much of a concern, but it is something that they need to consider about where they draw the boundaries and how they're able to share data. And that's really the biggest sticking point in the Arab states region at the moment. There is this. There's not as much awareness around the benefits of sharing data in that region as there is in the Asia Pacific region, for example. And sometimes it's about making the argument out what data types you will share and what data types you won't share. So this is a conversation that we're having with the countries from that region at the moment to get them to maybe open up some of the older static data rather than talking about real-time GNSS streaming, to make them realize that there's benefits of providing those static products and making them open and available. All right, so I'll stop there. I want to give plenty of time for our next speaker. But before we jump across to looking at the Asia Pacific component in more detail, I'd be interested to know if anyone's got any questions out of that. So I'll open the floor. Thank you. Everyone's sorted now, are they? They know exactly how they're going to do it. Ready to go home? All done? Easy? After lunch or? Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for the presentation, because I think I would like to acknowledge Geoscience Australia for managing APRIF as well. With respect to APRIF, we see that benefit that with the Fiji stations, like 8 additional stations and the SPC one, which is the 9th one, we are looking into a collaboration to have all the data sent to Geoscience Australia. In that sense, we are looking at the data being managed by Geoscience Australia. Not only that, but we have that accessibility too as well. We would not have issues with the storage too as well. So it's well archived on the cloud. And then when we look at seeing the analysis component as well, Geoscience Australia does a weekly solution analysis. So these stations are well analyzed, and the results are being accessed to as well. So again, you can also access the SINEX data too as well, all the metadata, and all of that is accessible. So that's the benefit of having being part of the APRIF too as well. So that's where we are looking at, and we are encouraging countries to be part of that too as well. So another initiative which is coming out just recently is through IUGG, and Tonga is developing the GNSS course. We are also encouraging Tonga for those stations to be part of APRIF 2 as well. So I understand Ancela and Billy are not here, but they have been actually working on the background to install those GNSS cores in Tonga too as well. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, I was thinking about the situation in Nepal with the network that you've talked about. There's a very good reason for them to be on APRIF because it's such a tectonically, it's in a convergence zone between the Indian and the Eurasian plate. So a dense cores network in Nepal would be not just from a datum point of view, but also from a hazard mitigation, from a seismic modeling point of view, would be very good. Be really the value, the scientific value, almost exceeds that of the geospatial.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that. Yeah, actually, we are also working on densifying our course network, where this year we're building, as I'm talking, so 27 additional, not the complete stations, but 27 monuments for the course are being built, mostly due to the shortage of fund maybe. And next year we're planning to do campaign GNSS observations on those stations. And maybe the next year only we will try to fix the GNSS antenna and receivers on the stations. So maybe after this is complete, we are going to have some densified network.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Even the campaign observations are going to be really helpful because as we'll talk about later on, there is the APREF, but there's also campaigns that the APREF community run every year, and you can collect data and have it analyzed and processed in combination with all the APREF data. So you'll end up getting ITRF equivalent coordinates coming out the other end, which will be processed using your data set in conjunction with all the other sites. So that would be something else that you could consider to do with your campaign observations before you convert them into core stations potentially into the future. Yeah. Yes.
Sorry. So from your presentation, can we conclude that, correct me if I'm wrong, to link between datum, we can use transformation parameters and also deformation model. Is that true? To link.
Sorry, can you say that again?
If we update from the old datum to the new datum, and we have to link between that datum, right? So we can use two ways. One is using transformation parameters, and the other one is using deformation model. Deformation model. Is that true?
It depends on the region. So in some places, and we'll talk about this, we have a presentation specifically on transformation parameters, and I'll talk about the distinction. In some places, you can just use a 7-parameter transformation to move from one to the other. In some cases, though, that may not be accurate enough. So I use the example of New Zealand, where due to a lot of earthquakes, a simple transformation from one to the other, it can't model all the effects of the earthquakes. So they end up using a deformation model and a 7-parameter transformation. They use both. So they do a 7-parameter, and then they see what deformation is left over, and they develop a model based on that deformation. So they end up doing 2 steps. In some countries, you can just do 1 step, and in other countries, you need to do both steps. Yes.
So I have a very fundamental kind of question, which I sometimes struggle answering, right, while discussions. So the question is, okay, there are so many applications that are being pursued, right? And that too without connecting our regional datums to the, means the national datums to the regional datums or the international datums, right? Maybe some industry and all, they are just showing the solutions, especially in India after this national geospatial policy. The geospatial data has been like democratized, right? So it has been given to the industry and they are presenting solutions. Now, how would you explain that? Why do we need to connect our national datum with the regional datum, and especially pursue this centimeter level reference frame, right, from the industrial point of view, or to explain the government? Because the solutions, like quick solutions, are handy, right? They are being pursued, they are being developed. So what is like long term? How could you explain to those people, like other than the scientific applications, the global scientific applications, what are other uses for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you'll realize that when we start working on the roadmap document, that the first 5, I think, steps that are in the roadmap have nothing to do with the technology. They all have to do with stakeholder engagement. So I would agree with you. Put yourself in the position of the minister. And if you don't have businesses or industries that need a more accurate datum, don't bother asking for money to develop a new or more accurate datum. You saw with the Australian scenario, all of the use cases were because they were going to generate tax revenue back to the Australian government. We didn't ask for a millimetre accurate frame for Australia because industry doesn't need it. But the centimetre, the less than 2 centimetre accuracy, that's where the development was going to come from. That's where the improved efficiencies come from. That's where the tax revenue comes from. So depending on the accuracy of the current reference system you have, I would consider, are there specific elements you need to upgrade? Now, the one area that we'd probably get to where you can much more easily make that case is around height datums and geoid model development. If you've already got a reference system that's connected with ITRF and you have transformation parameters to move your data around, that's great. You're probably in a good position. But how good is your geoid model? Because if your geoid model is only accurate to 10 centimeters, there's going to be a whole range of applications relating to fluid flow that, sewage networks, agriculture, maritime industry, ports authorities, all those areas, they need very strong connection between land and sea. And that relies on a geoid. So I would probably be investing my time in developing a business case for an improved geoid model, which means airborne gravity and relative gravity measurements. So you got to look, you won't get to the end of this week and think, I'm going to write a business plan that's going to upgrade the whole reference system. You probably want to find those areas where you think we have a business need in our country and we have a deficiency in the current part of the system. And it could be the geoid model for you, where you say, that's where we're going to go back and we're going to invest our time and energy.
One of the question was like, what is the importance of combining or connecting the, let's say, national data with the, let's say, APREF, right? So why do we invest in that or something like that, right? So what is the need for that, or why we need to go for ITRF and like changing the datums? Because yeah, dynamic datum and semi-dynamic datum, they are important, right? But how do you explain them? That okay, what is the use case for them? How to generate the maybe some kind of income from them?
Yeah, it's not so much about generating income. That international collaboration, the benefit there is that in the case of most countries in this room, it's Geoscience Australia are going to do the work for you. So you don't need that. If you submit that data, you don't need to run that capability or run that cloud service or buy that software in your country because it's being produced by somebody else. And it's aligned with ITRF, which is the system in which all your satellite imagery and your GNSS data is coming from. So the IRNSS, the NAVIC system, you're going to get coordinates that are coming out of that in real time or post-process for India. That's not a capability you need to run. So it's almost an efficiency gain is how I would see that, rather than being a tax revenue benefit. All right, I now with ITRF. So each week, a new station is computed for these sites, and they'll be directly aligned with ITRF in exactly the same way as these other ones are, these black ones. You then got a third data set. These are your, and let's call these campaign GNSS. Now, who does campaign GNSS? We heard about Nepal before? Who else does campaign GNSS? Yeah, so Richard, maybe can you give us an example of why do you do campaign instead of, say, cause, for example, in particular regions?
Well, it comes down to costs. You want to get velocities and datum connection, but the data is not going to be used continuously, so it's more cost effective to observe a station for a day or a few days. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great example. And again, it might be regional. So you might have regions where you have campaign observations and you remonitor them could be every year, could be every 2 years. And you probably have these spread out just in areas of interest where you need to get specific information. So you can see we've got these ones, they're done less often, but they're done just in particular regions. Now, the key thing you want to be able to do is you want to make sure that when you're running these campaign observations, again, they're aligned with ITRF. It's critical that you get all of this campaign data analysed and adjusted with respect to ITRF. Finally, you might have some historical data that is terrestrial data, and this could be collected using, it could be old levelling instruments, it could be horizontal angles, it could be bearings and distances. You've got this old collection of maybe historical data, but the interesting thing might be, in some regions, you might have some in here because you used to want to study that area using terrestrial observations, but you haven't done it for 30 years. And the newer ones, the campaign GNSS, are more accurate, more reliable now. So you don't really need them. But there might be other areas like here and here and over here, where these are the only terrestrial observations that you have that are connecting into these parts of your country. So in that case, you may want to know this information. You may want to retain that in an adjustment that you're doing in your country. So you can see here, we've got 4 years of different data. Now, if we come back to, just to get it clear in everyone's head, where does the analysis get done? What responsibility do I have? What responsibility is currently handled by somebody else? And who can I get to do the other parts where I feel like I don't have the expertise? When it comes to things like these ITRF stations, they're put together through the global analysis centres. So some of you may be involved in those activities, but if you're not doing that, it's not a concern. These things are going to be done for you most of the time. So you have this data. You'll get ITRF coordinates provided to you through the internet, thanks to the global analysis centres around the world. Then we get to the APREP stations. So this coordinate time series, weekly observations, velocity fields, as Basara took us through before. You can take responsibility for doing this kind of work. And it's great to be able to get to that point where you're an analysis centre within your country that can also provide regional solutions for people. So there's different groups like Basara's organisation. They're going through a process of evaluating how they do this in Japan and comparing it with China and Australia. And then once we get to the point where they're combined and they're provided and they're getting the same sort of results, they get accepted as a regional analysis centre to be able to provide this information for the APREF community. But if in your country you don't have the capacity or the capability to do this, this will be done for you by somebody else, by a regional organisation. Now, not every region has that luxury. As I said, Africa and the Arab states don't have that. So currently they don't have this dense connection through to the ITRF that you get through APREF. So that's an advantage that you have in your region. When we get to the green bits and the blue bits, this is where you in your national mapping teams have to come in and take responsibility for the work. So the work that you're doing here, again, you need expertise in doing some sort of GNSS analysis. This probably should be through things like Bernice or Gypsy or something like that to analyse your data. particularly if you're looking at comparing information from the same survey point, survey mark, of different campaign observations over different time periods. There's some sort of analysis capability that you need there, some sort of training. You may not have that yet, but that's where you should look for opportunities to maybe work with other government organisations or groups like SPC. Andrick, I know, provides a lot of advice for Pacific Island countries, for example, on how to do GNSS analysis. And then you analyse your terrestrial data as well. Now, the next step, and what I'll show you on the slides in a minute, is how all that information comes together into one big national adjustment. But before you get to the adjustment, I just wanted to walk you through these steps to show who's collecting this information at different levels and what responsibility do you have. So the big ones, ITRF, again, they're using things like Bernese software, Gypsy software, and then they're doing combinations of techniques using software like CatRef. Extremely complex and takes a lot of training to get to that level. Same with the APREF time series analysis. To come up with weekly coordinates and velocities on those sites, it's done through Bernese or Gypsy or something like that. And again, much more complicated type of GNSS analysis. So it's great that you have the opportunity to rely on those. And then as we'll go through in a minute with the slide deck I've got, this is really where you come in analysing the green and the blue different data sets. Before I move back to the slide deck, does anyone have any questions on that kind of setup? I hope that helps explain the sort of tiered structure of how data is captured and collected and analysed. Yes, thanks.
Yes, hi. For the UPREF stations, do you have like a prescribed distance for your course that you can submit to UPREF? Because right now, for the Philippines, we're submitting only the National Geodetic Reference Frame sites and not all of our course. All PageNet stations we submit through the APRGP. So do you recommend that we submit also all the data from our PageNet to UPREF or just some sites?
Are the PageNet ones all cores stations?
Yes, all cores.
Okay, so I can't remember all the guidelines for APREF off the top of my head, but I don't think they're not limited to distance, for example. So I would have thought you're welcome to provide any high quality data, particularly where you see it as valuable. So if you've got scenarios like through here, if you've got a particular region of interest where you want all that data analysed together, I don't think that should stop you from submitting that data. It's more about data quality rather than the baselines between them. Yeah. Any other questions on any of that? Does it make sense? Please tell me if it doesn't. This is your opportunity. This is what these workshops are about. They're about asking questions, making sure that it's clear. There's no such thing as a stupid question when it comes to geodesy. Trust me. Victor.
Yeah. The red color one, the APREF, how do we, the connection to APREF, how do we explain the benefit to the country? I think that's a key point as well. That's a bit hard to explain. Like, for example, why do you need to constantly connected to the ITRF? I just got one coordinate ITRF. I'm happy with it. And why do we need to constantly do that?
I think it's a great question, and it's very important to be able to tell that story. So I think that the major benefit, if it was, let's say you're Singapore, you've got core stations running throughout your country, the benefit is that you're getting a time series of information about that particular site. So you'll be able you're getting other people to constantly monitor and QA and QC the quality of the data that's coming out, and also any information about movement of that site over time. And that's being done, it can be done better when you're analysing that data in conjunction with other high density sites in that region. So it's just like any other type of surveying, where if you've got sites that are further away from each other, you can't make as many inferences about what's happening. But if you have lots of data analysed together, your analysis becomes stronger. So you as a country end up being able to get someone else do the analysis for you. In the case of Singapore, if you don't want to analyze that data yourself, and the data will be of better quality. So, but at the moment, so is that run by a private company? Is that what Avit was indicating before? Run by you, but commercialized. Okay. And is the main benefit for that private company that do they want the real-time data, or do they want the static data? What is it? What is that they are getting out of it? What are they selling?
Basically, yeah, outsource company is just
Okay.
and we need for static and
Okay. So you may have a business case where you could tell your government, we want to make the static data available to APREF, because then they're going to analyze that data for us and tell us about the data quality of the data from our area. But you don't need to give away the real-time data, for example. Maybe that's a business case you could potentially make.
is that why we project? Because I think we link the streaming to the streaming of the data.
Yes. Yes. And that's the argument that we made in Australia at the time, and it's the argument that many others have made. And if we give it away and everyone else is giving it away, then we end up with the rising tide raises all ships, right? We're all helping each other out. But there's also, in Australia, there's private networks where that data is not going through to APREF, but the industry are able to submit it to APREF if they want to, if they see benefit. And many of them do. They want to contribute to APREF because we're monitoring the network for them. So we're not giving away their real-time streaming, but they're still getting access to the benefits of being involved in the project. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Just to bring up a case which just recently happened in Vanuatu, and I think it will add value to Victor's comments as well, because what had happened in December on 17th, there was a big earthquake in Vanuatu, and there was a lot of damages in the main town area. And so after that event, there was issue of the cruise ships coming into the harbor, because they said, oh, they cannot come in because there are changes to the to the reef structure. So there was an uplift, but from the analysis which we saw recently in February done by the Geoscience Australia, it's just on one single point, which was the IGS station. And so we saw some movement, and it was not a small movement, it was centimeter level of movement. I would say 5.8 or 6 centimeter. So then our team went from SPC, and we also collaborated with New Zealand and UKHO as well. So we did the geodetic, so precise leveling, and we found some movement, and there was some fault lines going, on the island as well. And we saw some of our benchmarks moved about 14 centimeter or 10 centimeter. It was different. But then again, that same drop has happened in the harbor too as well. So you see the cruise ships have stopped coming into the harbor for there's 150 cruise ships coming in a year. They are losing a lot of, revenue. So Vanuatu government wanted to, map the harbor too as well. So we did also the hydrographic survey. We deployed the tide gauge stations, and all the rigorous surveys were done. So now we are able to say, okay, how much they have moved, there was changes or not changes. So this is something which, is important for the country. Even though it was one IGS station, but there were, historical data on other GNSS cores, which was managed by the French, department IRD. They were able to use that and then re-observe those French stations too as well, and see how much they have moved to as well vertically. So we could provide evidence on the vertical land motions too as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good practical example of how, because Vanuatu, for example, doesn't have the people who would be running that, understanding the quality or the movement of that station every week. So it's a great use case of how it's flowed all the way through to a practical realization of the impact on the shipping industry and also on the tourism industry in Vanuatu. Yeah. Ryan, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, it was just a general question to the audience. Is anybody in their government, their departments thinking about any of these particular tasks? We'd really be interested to hear that, you know, there are groups thinking, well, we've been thinking around this and we don't know where to start. Or you're already started on this. So can anybody share any insights to if they're following this or they're wanting to do this, these steps and tie in their national datum on a regional or international level? And I might ask Rupesh, you made some questions. So just in general, are there groups who are wanting to do this and don't know where to start, or who have already started these activities?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and also thank you, Nick, for the presentation. It's really a very informative presentation indeed, especially from Fiji's perspective, as we're working on our modernization of geodetic datum. I was going through Nick's presentation. I just thought to myself, if this could be done like 5 or 7 years ago, so I can apply this knowledge to the project that we are currently working on in terms of our datum project, because it's really useful, and already have a plan to at least take this knowledge back home and provide training to our geodetic surveyors back at home with Hendrik. But going back to so that's the benefit of why the UN-GGCE was established, because of the gaps that we have. I know that this presentation is very useful indeed. So going back to the APRIF, when we did our modernization of geodetic datum project, I know that it's meaningless if we don't tie to the APRIF, because we're going back to the basic concept of geodetic survey. You need a reference station in order for you to actually start your survey with. So that's also applied to how we actually do the geodetic survey back at home. We have a local station occupied with Genesis coast station, but we need to tie that to the regional network, and also our coast station to be tied to the regional network and also to the IGS stations. So if we don't have an APRIF, if you don't tie our coast station to the APRIF station, then I think that the data that we collect it's not going to be analyzed to a standard that we actually want the result of. So I think that's why we need to, in this forum, we need to agree that we, by the next 5 years, if all our, at least 5 or 10 coast stations from each countries are included into the APRIF. So it can be managed regionally, and we can manage our own local coast stations at a secondary, or it's like a third tier coast station back at home. So that's something that I was thinking, because if not, then we'll still have a gap. If you come back to this forum like next year, when this same presentation is presented, at least all of us are on the same page, understanding the basic concept behind this. So I think that is very important. So just going back to the basic concept of cadastral survey or normal surveying, you need a control station to start off a new survey. So for this, we need a gestation at the international standard and also the regional before we actually localize it to our national network. Thank you.
Thanks, Tabua. We'll move on to the next session, but just want to prime you a little bit.
We've got time. Go
Oh,
for it.
okay.
Yeah.
I just want to prime you a little bit for some of the activities that are coming up in the next days. Obviously,
Bring that up. Would it help if I bring that up? We can go to it now if you want.
okay, we can.
Were you talking about, you're going to bring up that?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, I'll just bring it up on the screen so we can see it.
So just
Sorry,
gonna use
just to
this.
add to that, my government has approved 8 of our coast stations to be included in the APRIF. So that was the decision of our cabinets to include 8 of our coast stations to the APRIF. So that's something that just want to share in this forum. We hope that we try to build collaboration with other agencies, private sector, if they can establish some of the coast stations, if we can include in the APRIF for the future, that is going to be also a benefit for Fiji and also for the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Tabua. Yeah, so just in preparation for some of the activities that will start off tomorrow morning, but it's really to talk around this capacity development. Hopefully you've heard some really good examples already today during the discussion, is that many nations have aspirations, but they don't fully have the resources or the capability to do certain things. But together, you know, within the region, there is skill and capability and availability, for example, for the AFREF processing, which would help you to better determine your national geodetic reference frame. One of the first things we're going to be doing tomorrow, and we can talk about this very briefly now, is really to understand where you are now with your current geodetic infrastructure and capabilities. So the first session tomorrow morning, we'll touch into this Geodesy fact book. And it's something Nick and I were chatting about as we work towards the first workshop in the European region. And it was really, unless an organization can define and share within its own group what we can do, what we can't do, how many stations do we have, what datums do we have. Unless you do that, you don't know what you're missing. And when we're talking around modernizing your national geodetic reference frame, you can't improve on something you don't know what you have already. So this is going to be one of the activities, the first group activities for you tomorrow, is to spend an hour or so going through with your colleagues and writing down what is the current state of geodesy in your nation. And we'll just scroll through some of these here. They're already on the, will be on the download area for tomorrow morning. But this blank template that each of you will be able to work with allows for you to put in information about your geodetic datum. You can see some of the parameters here. It could be, as Nick mentioned, that certain nations actually have a number of geodetic datums. So Australia have 2 geodetic datums, the time dependent and also the static datums, as he's mentioned there before. And obviously there is reasons for doing this. As you go through also, you can see in this fact book, we invite you to put in information, all metadata that you have around these datums. And the reason why we're going to ask you to do this is because that's extremely important to know what you know about your datum. Is that datum and the reference frame, is that known beyond your department? Is it on an external register that industry or another government department can actually access and refer to? Because if you don't have those sets of information standardized and in an accessible format that can be interpreted, you're always going to have challenges to modernize your reference frame. You're going to have a challenge to get people to use it and adopt it if they don't know how to read and interpret it. We also have a section here about the physical height datum as well. Not only on land, but we'll go through into the maritime datum as well, because that's extremely important. Not only from the geodetic point of view, but also from the hydrographic departments in your nations and your countries, the maritime industry. So hopefully you'll get to see, going through this fact book tomorrow, that you're starting to get that better understanding of what you already have, that metadata, but also how it potentially can be used and shared with other partners in your nation. And this is going to be really fundamental for us going through to the business case development. So if you can just scroll down a little bit more, Nick, we'll go through this in more depth tomorrow. But we also have a section in there for you to complete around your geodetic infrastructure. You've heard about the different types of geodetic infrastructure: GNSS, SLR, VLBI, DORIS, tide gauges. It's extremely important for you to be able to understand what infrastructure you do have there. If you didn't have any tide gauges, okay, are you really in control of your height datum? Especially where it relates to the marine environment. Also, we have an opportunity here for you to put in information about your gravity infrastructure. How are you doing that? Are you working with that? Is that something that your department does, owns, maintains, or do you have subcontractors for that? Again, that's very important for you to understand, because if you do want to support something in the future around an improved geoid model for your hydrological activities. If you don't have any of that skill or expertise within your organization, then already you know you need to find a partner who can do this for you, the data acquisition, but also the processing, the analysis as well. And as you go through the fact book tomorrow, we'd also talk here about, okay, tell us about your geodetic capabilities. Not only simple things like, okay, data collection and data archiving, but analysis. Do you have that capability within your member state? Can you develop geodetic products from your current team and resources? Or is it something that you don't have that experience of? Again, that's an understanding of what capabilities you have and also what you don't have. We have a section in there also about governance. And as Nick mentioned this morning, that is an extremely important part that we as technical people tend to overlook. We think about softwares and equipment and data formats and so on, but the governance. Who's responsible for this? Who leads this? Who can give the decision, the go or the no-go around some of these activities? Also, who pays for these? Again, that's where governance comes in and is extremely important. We also invite you to put in information in there about the involvement of academia and industry partners. Some nations actually have industry partners who take over some of these capabilities and do data processing on a nation's behalf. And that's it. So this is just some of the group activity we'll be getting you to do tomorrow morning. But to use as a work in progress as you go back after this workshop. You might not be able to answer all of these questions tomorrow. It will be fantastic if you can, but we doubt that you can. But we really want each of you to be using this with your colleagues, not only here, but also back in your home departments, to use that to gather a definitive set of metadata around your geodetic capabilities. It's that fact book. It's for you, for your colleagues. We'll offer that you can share this with the center if you like. We would love to be able to take any non-confidential information and have that, because when the center can also customize information and workshops to help provide and fill in for some of that capability that you're missing. So with that, I'll pass it back to Nick. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that sets the scene well and shows how a lot of this stuff comes together. And I looked around the room and I saw a few people go, I wasn't looking at you, Vipo, it's all right. By the way, I should say, Mr. Vipo, who's here, please, warm welcome for you. I'm glad you could be here. He was waylaid this morning. It wasn't his fault, but Vipo from Cook Islands, and Vipo is also one of the chair. He is the chair of the Pacific Geospatial and Surveying Council, which is a very prominent and important council in the Pacific region, Asia Pacific. So you didn't get to say hello this morning, so I'd love it if you could open your mic and just say hi to everybody and do a quick introduction. Thanks, Vipo.
Your Honor, everyone. My name is Vipo, as mentioned by Nick. From the Cook Islands. I'm currently the chair for the Pacific Geospatial and Surveying Council. Also the deputy secretary for infrastructure Cook Islands, and also I'm also in charge of the National Hydrography and Geoscience division in the Cook Islands. So I wear a lot of hats. That's why I'm here, and also from here I'll be going to New York to present our extended continental shelf with our subcommission. So I've been in this field for quite some time, and also the reason why I'm here is the same reason why some of our Pacific countries to catch up with other major countries like Japan and other countries to modernize our geodetic network. And some of our countries have already started. We are just lagging behind So we'd like to catch up and erase our status in terms of geodesics, geodesy in the Pacific region. So thank you again for the invitation, and I'm so excited to be here to see Nick and some familiar faces from the past a workshop we had in Indonesia. So from me, kia ora, and thank you.
Thanks, Vaipo. Yeah, the PGSC gets recognized around the world now as being one of the great initiatives of having a regional network and bringing people together to help each other. We've seen such great advancement through the Pacific region over the last 10 or 15 years because of people like Andrik and Vaipo and Tambua, who've done a great job in helping each other. And I think that's the key. It doesn't come with a lot of resources, what they're doing. There's very limited support for what they're doing, but because they're doing it together, they end up being a lot stronger. So yeah, thanks for that, Vaipo, and it's great to have you here. Yeah, coming back to my other point, I saw a lot of people saying, this is tough, and that's good. That's good. You're realizing this is not easy. I don't want anyone being under the impression that modernizing even a component of your geospatial reference system is easy. It's not. It takes many years. It takes a lot of support from a lot of different people outside the technical area. And we're going to be focusing on that a lot more. You need to be going home not thinking about how can I solve a technical problem. You need to be going home and saying, how can I build my network in my country and my region? You need to be finding those stakeholders who are interested in having a better geospatial reference system in your country who don't understand what a geospatial reference system is. And you need to spend a lot of time educating people in your government about why money should be spent on it. And the industries is going to help and the stakeholders is going to benefit. So we talk about a lot of that when we get into the roadmap discussion, which will come in the coming days. So yes, we've covered a bit of technical stuff here today to help set the scene, but a lot of the work you're going to have to do is really around communications and improved governance. So if you don't know a lot of the questions, as Ryan said, if you don't know the answers to some of that stuff in the fact book, good. See it as a good thing. That's something I need to go home and I need to find someone who understands this because they're going to be my ally. They're going to help me on this path that we're on. You can't do this on your own. Don't think you can do it on your own because it's just impossible. All right, with that in mind, I've got a few, this is really going back now and showing you with diagrams so that when you get home, you realize why we spent half an hour on the butcher's paper up there. This is just showing you those steps at those extra level of detail. So the ITRF points around your region, they were the black crosses. And then you get into the regional reference frame, which were the red ones. Then you might have a national network, which could be your red ones or your green ones, depending on how you set them up. And then the GNSS and terrestrial could be the green ones or the blue ones where you bring everything in. So those first two steps, it could be handled by somebody else. But then you get to that third step of having a national scale network adjustment. This is where you really come in and you need to be developing that by yourself and building up that capability to do that by yourself. And that will then include incorporating the national network adjustment. And that's the bit we're going to focus on over the next few slides, showing how do I then follow that through to come up with new coordinates on the survey marks on every street corner in your country. How do you propagate from the global all the way down to the local? You got a headache? Yeah, it's just started. It's only Monday. All right, so who said Geodesy was easy? It wasn't me. You got to select those global reference stations. So these are either your APREF stations or your ITRF, IGS stations, and they could come from, in the case of your work, from Geoscience Australia. You can reach into that archive of data that Basara was talking about before and get access to that time series and use that as the constraint in your national adjustment. So actually, I might stop here just to get, and trust me, there is no, like if you've never heard of a national adjustment before, that's okay. But if you have, I'd like you to raise your hand if you've done doesn't have to be a national, but some sort of least squares adjustment with your data. You've done some sort of least squares adjustment with GNSS data? Yeah, a few people. Okay. Maybe can I just get a show of hands who doesn't know what I'm talking about when I talk about a least squares adjustment of data? Please don't feel embarrassed. Thank you. Good. So what effectively I'm talking about here is, if I come back, let's see if I've got any. It's not in this one. Let me jump to the other one and I'll show you what I mean. I really encourage people to ask questions because this is your opportunity. This is why we're here this week. No, that's too complicated. Right, so what happens, I'm going to go up onto the whiteboard again. So the first thing you want to do is you want to collect those stations that you want to use as your reference points. So they're the ITRF or your APREF points. And I've sort of given a bit of guidance material on the right-hand side that you'll be able to see in the slides. And then for those points, you can access the high-quality information, as I said, from the APREF Central Bureau. And then you want to hold that information tightly constrained in your network adjustment. And then for the next step you want to do is you want to process your national GNSS data. So they're the green points that you would then bring into it. So in your processing, you include the GNSS stations along with the reference frame that you're aligning it with, which will be ITRF 2020. And then you need things like the IGS orbits and clocks. So this is where it can be quite complicated with the Bernese processing that you're using, because you actually need IGS products. In order to process the GNSS data accurately, you need to know exactly where the satellites were when they sent the signal that was received on the ground. And for that, it means they're called final products. They're produced by the International GNSS Service, and the final products get released about 2 weeks after the satellite has flown over wherever you are. So you wait about 2 weeks after you've captured your observations, and then you can collect the IGS orbit and clock products along with the Earth rotation parameters that we were talking about earlier. And that ensures that when you align all this data, it's lined up correctly with ITRF. So then by combining the processing with that constraint that you're fixing, your national GNSS stations are then going to be fixed with respect to ITRF 2020. Then you want to do your network adjustment. You want to take your data and go through that process I talked about before of developing those baselines. And that national GNSS network of station coordinates is going to be the control and the datum points for your national adjustment. You then want to integrate all your available national geodetic data in that adjustment. So that's when you're bringing in all the GNSS, all the terrestrial leveling data, whatever you have access to establish your consistent and modern national geodetic datum. And this can be done using software like, there's free software available like Dynadjust. This isn't the only one, but it's a good one that you could lean on because it's open source software. And there's a link at the end of this of where you can get access to it on GitHub. And what this does is it then propagates the GNSS station coordinates down, all the way down to your local survey marks. As long as you have some sort of connection, which could be a GPS baseline connection, it could be terrestrial data. As long as you have a connection between a GNSS site and your local survey mark, when you run it through a geodetic adjustment, you will end up with coordinates down on those local survey marks. So here's an example just for your reference, where you can see how that the yellow one is a GNSS cause site that's an international or regional one. You've then got your national cause, and then there might be national survey marks, which would be down at the street corner level. And you're holding the yellow one fixed, holding the blue one slightly weighted more highly, and then the red ones will normally float a little bit more, and they're not weighted as strongly. And then the process you go through from a national adjustment is you bring in all the data, you align the stations and the measurements to a specific epoch. So it might be 2020, 2025, whatever you choose to use as your fixed epoch for your datum. You then choose which, you do the datum or reference frame transformations. You've got to bring all of the different stations into the same reference frame. This can be done through things like a plate motion model. There's international ones available if you don't have ones for your specific country. You then need to make sure that all the data is referenced with respect to the ellipsoid. So you may have some orthometric heights or leveled heights. You need to make sure you convert those into ellipsoidal heights to put them into a national adjustment. You can't just put an orthometric height into the national adjustment. It needs to be an ellipsoidal height. So you would apply an ellipsoid to geoid separation to the leveled height to make sure that you're then using that as a derived ellipsoidal height in your adjustment. If you've got a lot of data, what DynaJust will do is a network segmentation. So it breaks it down into smaller blocks to create that adjustment. And that can be then done through parallel or sequential phased adjustments. And then output is the uncertainties. And so here's an example of where you can see 2.4 million measurements were put in from over 300,000 stations in Australia to do a continental-wide national adjustment. So there's all different types of data that have been fed into that. There's very old sort of style geodetic azimuths, ellipsoidal arc, slope distance. As you can see, the vast majority are GNSS baselines, ellipsoidal heights, orthometric heights, and leveled height differences. And that's all gone into one adjustment to compute a coordinate set across the whole continent. So this is probably the most extreme case of what you can do in terms of a network adjustment. And what I showed you on the board up there, I showed you in the diagram before, is one of the simplest, where you've got 15 points, one of them's an IGS site, and then you've got about 5 that might be into APREF. It doesn't really matter, the concept is still the same. This is just showing you that you can use software like DynaJust to do something at all levels. It doesn't matter how simple or how complex your national adjustment is. So here's a link that you can go and access DynaJust. It's one of the most impressive pieces of software that I've ever seen, and it's open source. And that's largely thanks to a few people in Australia, predominantly Roger Fraser, who works for the Victorian government. One of the most humble people I've ever met in my life. He wrote most of this software when he was traveling on a train to and from work every day. He did it as his PhD many years ago, but then he rewrote it. And then through a collaboration with all the different states and territories around Australia, he's now made the software available as open source. And for those of you who use Esri software, this software runs in the back of Esri, because Esri had land management parcel management software that was in Esri packages, and it couldn't handle big adjustments. So they've now worked with Roger and incorporated this into the back end of Esri, so you can do land management parcels within Esri software. There's also a link here to talk about network GNSS analysis and some links and resources around what techniques you can use for things like GNSS quality checking. Some of you might have heard of the Anubis software. There's also some software on repairing and manipulating data, GFZ to RNX that's available. There's a link through there to DynaJust, as well as some presentations that go through the steps of the least squares processing in more detail. For very good reason, I haven't gone through it in a great deal of detail here, because it's highly complicated. For those of you who did study it at university, you know that it takes a long time to get your head around this. So if you're very new to this and didn't follow all that, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. The key point to realize is that there is this tiered level of information. And that's why I wanted to go through that on the whiteboard up there, sorry, on the butcher's paper before, just to understand those simple concepts. That's really the key. There is good reason to be connected with what's happening internationally. The regional work can be handled by somebody else, and you do need some technical expertise to run an adjustment like this. Take that global regional data and incorporate it with your national data to produce a new national adjustment. So I hope that gives you a bit of an understanding of how all these elements fit together. That's really what I wanted to cover today. And as I said, there's more presentations there that there's a few hours worth of presentations you can watch on YouTube, some of which were presented by Roger Fraser himself, who wrote the software, which I think you might find helpful if you're looking to understand this in more detail. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to take any other questions. We've still got about half an hour for today, so we've got plenty of time for discussion. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I want to ask, my name is Febri from Indonesia. Have you done to integrate all available national geodetic data, including GNSS, terrestrial, and leveling? Have you integrate all data and then adjust in DynaJust?
Yes, definitely. So if you look at this one, for example, we call them different types. So there's GNSS baselines, GNSS baseline clusters, and then So it depends on whether you're fixing the point in the adjustment or tightly constraining it, or you're letting it be loose. So there's different types of GNSS you can put in. Then you can add in your leveling data as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just curious because there is a different reference system that in ellipsoid and autometrical height, you know, and is in what accuracy of your geode model? I'm sorry, in Australia. In Australia, a geode model with what accuracy is it?
It's the Oz geoid model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the accuracy of Oz geoid
Oh, the
model?
accuracy, sorry. So it depends what area you're working in. In some places, it's probably only good to about 10 to 15 centimeters in absolute accuracy.
Yeah, so 10 centimeters, is that accuracy of 10 centimeter and until 15 centimeter, is that will be minimized on the damages? So in Indonesia, we separate the processing. We combine only the 3D Cartesian coordinate from the our cross network coincide with the ITRF, and then we separate the processing of our geoid model. So after we have the exact point of our coordinate of core station up to 3 millimeters, and then we have the different geoid model 5 until 20 centimeters. So we separate the vertical and horizontal references. So I think it's the new approach, yeah, Mr. Bagas, that there are that Australia have been done with the adjustment that combine and integrate all the data and vertical and horizontal approaches.
So we in Australia, what we did, we only brought in the leveling data where it was really necessary. So because the uncertainty in converting that orthometric height into a derived ellipsoidal height by using the geoid model, you would only do that in areas where you didn't have GNSS data, because the GNSS data is going to be more accurate than 10 centimeters. So it was pretty rare where we imported that leveling data. And as I mentioned before, it was really only you bring those in areas where you don't have any other data set. So the advice we gave to the states and territories who provided that information to us was that if that area is very valuable to have included into the adjustment, they should consider going out and re-observing it with GNSS rather than using the leveling data. Does that make sense?
You get the 3D Cartesian from the XYZ from the ellipsoidal we get from the GNSS, and then you just try to rectify to the local data using your vertical measurement from your levelment geoid model, right?
Yeah, only when necessary. And this was to create the new national datum, but the height datum was handled differently. We didn't develop the height datum with the horizontal datum at the same time. They were done independently. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It's probably more of a question. We like Edwin and I have started doing the national adjustment for Papua New Guinea, but we have a bit of a problem because you can't do a coordinated campaign over the whole country simultaneously, and it's tectonically active. So we have isolated campaign measurements at different epochs. It's actually not really possible to do a simultaneous nationwide adjustment unless you know what the velocities are. But we actually need to do the observations to get the velocities. So it's the chicken and the egg syndrome. So what we're doing is like you have to do like local adjustments if they're done at the same time, but then you want to formalize an epoch. So that's a hard thing because your measurements are not necessarily at the reference epoch you choose. So you've got this awful situation where you've got a really accurate position in ITRF because you've had a station running for several hours or days, but that's not at the epoch you want the datum to be set at. So you have this issue. So
yeah, it's a fundamental issue, and I suppose it comes back to the advantage of having a continuously operating reference station network as sort of the backbone throughout the country. So how many cores have you are running currently throughout PNG? Do you know?
Well, there's 2 IGS stations, 3 APREF stations. There's 3 lower tier stations that are run for a specific purpose, and there's a few mining and agriculture, but we don't get the data.
I mean, even through that, you may have enough that's the continuous backbone. So if you're using each of those sites in every regional set of work that you're doing, if you're using those stations as the tier 1, sort of the fixed points that I was talking about before, do you think that could be enough to provide you with what you need?
Well, you need them to be close to your survey area, and it needs to be in the same tectonic setting. And so if you have a core station, say the one we have in Lae or the one at the government one in Port Moresby, and you're doing a survey in East New Britain, you can't use those stations because, you know, while the ITRF at the time's fine, when you regress those coordinates, when you propagate them back to the reference epoch, it doesn't make any sense anymore.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. And this is where things like weighting of the data might be something you want to consider. They talk about type B uncertainties with national adjustments. You're almost making a professional judgment that how much do I trust this site when I'm putting it into my adjustment. You can add uncertainty, and stuff that comes out of GNSS processing is very unrealistic. There's a lot of correlated errors that aren't taken into account. So you may want to increase the uncertainty of the data sets that you're incorporating, and then it almost becomes an argument to go back to government to say, if you want this to be more accurate, you're actually going to need more core stations throughout the country to constrain the adjustment in the future. So I don't see it as a bad thing to say that you're adding in that uncertainty, because you're being realistic about actually how good could my results be. And I think that's okay as long as you list your assumptions. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes,
Nick.
thank you.
I think in the same line, like as we are planning to do with the campaign observations. So let's assume we have 27 new monuments where we want to do the campaign observations, and we are limited to maybe 5 or 6 instruments. So what would we have to consider in selecting the reference epoch date, and how should we proceed? Like do some overlapping stations, or yeah, just want to get your idea on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's some other reports that I can send you about where I've seen these done very well before. The idea of having they call it a backbone or a network of constantly running stations. So let's say your region was this big and you were doing blocks across different regions. The advice would be to set up a set of continuous stations that are running the whole time. And then they become the link between your regional networks as you're observing that. And I've seen that done well for a lot of GNSS campaigns to help create connections between the different groups as you go through. The other thing you may want to consider, if you've only got 5 or 6 different kits at the moment, is see, and I'll talk to Andrick as well, there's some pools of equipment that hopefully can be made available. So you may be able to borrow sets of equipment. So instead of only doing 5 at a time, you could maybe do 10 or 15 at a time if you had extra sets of equipment, because that will really strengthen the quality of the observations you get and bring down the uncertainties of the data. Does that make sense? But I can give you, I can demonstrate I'll give you a couple of reports where I've seen these campaign surveys done by holding fixed a series of sites throughout the surveys, and you keep them running the whole time, and then you move all the other sites around it while keeping that backbone running.
That's a good idea. So, but in that case, what should be the reference epoch? Let's say we have a time of observation of a month. So what should be the reference epoch date? Like, should we keep it the middle or something like that?
Normally people would pick the middle.
Mhm.
It probably doesn't matter too much, but the normal practice is to pick the middle of your observation period and hope that you don't get a lot of tectonic movement in that time. That's normally the idea. You start observing and cross your fingers, and then you stop observing.
Yeah, and I was also thinking like Australia, as you mentioned earlier, they selected a reference date that's in the future. So with Nepal, like it's moving in northeast around 4 centimeters per year. So maybe that could be an idea to do a reference epoch in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason for that, it was almost made it easier to get the public to an industry to adopt the new standard, the new static datum, because if GDA 2020 was established in 2017, in October of 2017, so we picked an epoch in front, and what it meant was the Australian plate moved closer and closer, and the uncertainties got lower and lower, moving up to 2020. And that helped with the people picking it up and using it because it was more accurate. The link between GDA 2020 and what you were getting from satellites was getting closer and closer. Now that we're 5 years past it, it's drifting away again. So those people who want to keep using a static datum, you can, but you need to adjust by moving your coordinates back 5 years to 2020. But those other people who wanted to work in a time-dependent reference frame, they can just keep working in that time-dependent frame. So if you're looking to get uptake and in industry accepting it, sometimes it's good to move it to something into the future, because you're telling them now and for the next few years it's going to become more and more accurate. And then by that stage, they'll have become familiar with what the new datum is as you move away from it, and your models to then move back to this static epoch will be better and better, rather than having to do that all up front. And is it? I know you have a lot of earthquakes and things like that in your region as well. Is it? Does the country move almost as a whole, or do you think you are going to need a deformation study as well?
There have been some deformation studies, especially with Chris Pearson working on some of the models, but I think overall it's the deformation is not much within. I think it's like a block, more or less like a block.
So that would make your situation similar to Australia. You could copy a lot of the things that were done in Australia. I think it would work quite well. And in those areas where you need something more accurate, you could still develop a deformation model, but that takes a lot of extra time and energy. So you'd probably only do that in an area where you particularly need it, or you had a stakeholder where you particularly need it, rather than trying to do it across the whole country.
Yeah.
But we could help you with that, because we've got experience. We had to do that for some regions as well.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So the next issues when we finish align national datum to ITRF is how about the update the datum? What is the consideration to update our datum? Maybe it is related with the absolute accuracy and relative accuracy. So which is the most important, which is absolute accuracy or relative accuracy to update the datum?
Yeah, you want to think about both. I don't think absolute accuracy won't be too much of an issue, because you'll be aligned with ITRF. And in a relative accuracy, if you're running it through some sort of least squares adjustment, I don't think you'd have a problem. I think relative accuracy and absolute accuracy come up a bit more when it comes to height datums. That's probably where it's probably more relevant than it is for the horizontal datum, for the geometric datum. But in terms of the questions you should ask, I think you made a great point there on, I'd like to draw your attention to this document that we have a few minutes. I'll introduce you to now, because this is another one that's going to come up in the coming days. Ryan just said it's going to give you more of a headache. If you haven't had an aneurysm yet, then just wait, because you're about to. Now, this is where Tabua is going to go, this looks familiar. So this advice that we have here that we've built up is something that I've been working on with it started off as something I was working on with Andric and Tambua, and then Vipo will see that some of it's familiar as well. This gives you guidance on the steps you go through to develop your country's geospatial reference system. And you'll have an opportunity to go through this in more detail later this week as well and have time to start thinking about it. But I want to draw your attention to this, is what I brought up before. If you go through down that contents page, you don't get to anything technical until step 6. And so to come back to Sadiq's question before around what sort of absolute relative accuracy do you need for your datum, that's going to come out of here, number 1. And that's why it's number 1. You should not be doing anything technical until you've done this. First of all, your fact sheet, which is what Ryan talked you through before. That's step 1. That tells you your current state of where you are in your country. Then you can create a diagram to try and explain that to people if you want. But then the next action is around identify the needs of the stakeholders. I can't emphasize this enough. There is no point going to create a datum for your country that is 10 times more accurate than what the users need. You need to understand what's fit for purpose. You'll hear this a lot. UN likes to talk about development of fit for purpose products and services. I've never understood it more than when I've been in this job, because not everyone needs the gold standard of how you develop a national datum. You need to understand what your users need. Once you understand whether or not they need centimetre accurate positioning services, or is the fundamental reason why you're doing this for improved cadastral management or land property rights or natural hazard reduction, you need to understand what are the needs across government before you start investing in the ideas of how are you going to improve the reference system. Don't just set out to make the most technically the best datum for your country or the next best geoid model for your country. You've got to be thinking about what your users need. Once you understand what your users need, then you're in a position to go work out what technical solutions could fit it, and then how much money is it going to cost to build it. But don't do any of that, because you won't get any money, trust me. You won't get any World Bank funding until you can answer this question. No one in the World Bank that I've seen, or no government, has ever delivered money for Geodesy alone. It's always linked with a business case in a country. This requires a lot of interaction with people to understand what their needs are. You then summarize the needs of the stakeholders and decide which elements of your geospatial reference system actually need updating. You can then classify your stakeholders, understand how influential are they. Really, this comes down to how interested are they and how much money have they got. And if they're really interested and have a lot of money, pay them a lot of attention. Then you want to communicate it. At this point, the communication will be a lot easier because you know exactly what the stakeholders want and you've thought about the technical solutions that can deliver the benefits that they need. The challenge then is then translating that technical message into language that a politician can understand. Then you set up a governance situation, a governance structure. You need top level, you need cover, you need champions. Like we had Ambassador Thompson speaking before. You need these champions at high levels who can tell that story and help explain it to the people who have the money. Then you develop a business case. Then you create a project plan. Then you start to get into some of the technical stuff. And even then, at this stage, if you've already got one of these in your country, you might be skipping this step. You might already have that. You might realize that the only thing we need to do is develop a better geoid model. So you can skip 6, skip 7, skip 8, skip 9, skip 10, you're done. You might want a deformation model if you want to do things more accurately, but then you might want a physical height datum. You might come all the way down to step 12 based on what your stakeholders tell you at this time. So we're going to work through these, and you see there's a number of actions and guidance, and you don't need to go through each one by one, but you do need to start at the top. And I would think that you are going to have to interact with a lot of other people across your government organisation in order to be able to answer these questions and figure out what they want. If you do already have a good governance structure and good connections with people in your country and you can answer these questions, you're in a really good position. But I'm sure you all understand trying to establish new networks across government, that takes time as well. You've got to build up trust. And they all have jobs already. So you're effectively trying to get access to some of their time. So you've got to figure out what am I going to explain to them as the benefits of them spending time working with me. Some of the great examples I've seen is when you talk with people from land management agencies. They're the ones who are dealing with property management, land rights. There's normally a strong connection there straight away. They understand the value of a good datum and being able to measure things more efficiently. Like there's a good starting point there. So that's a logical place to start. But as I showed you before, in Australia, it was around agriculture, maritime, mining, building up those connections with different government departments and key industries in your country. So I just wanted to bring this up now. We're going to be going through it in more detail, and you'll have time to sit down, think about these actions and work together as a group to try and start working through this. And the main reason for that is because I want you to start and see, does it generate any questions or generate any concerns where you feel like you're going to need some more help? And if you do, then some of us in the room might be able to help you get started and get you over that first problem that you have. So we'll have time on the fact sheet tomorrow, and then I think we deal with the roadmap maybe on Thursday. We'll have a bit more time to focus on this. And you can have some quiet time, sit in here or sit out there and start thinking about mapping this out. So when you get home, you know what steps do I need to take and which one am I going to do first. Look familiar, Tambua? Just a little bit. All right. Any other questions or comments before we close for today?
I think it would be helpful if you might provide some more insight into this Australian national adjustment, like how many APRF stations were used and how many ITRF were used, and what were the steps that was followed, I think.
Sure, I'll bring that up again and I can talk you through it if you like.